If you're someone that's struggling at the moment, you feel like things are heavy on you and you feel like you've got a lot of tension in your life, or perhaps just a lot of pressure in your life. You feel like you're doing everything yourself, you're having to think of everything, you're having to work through all your problems, and you feel quite alone, then today's video is probably going to be very helpful for you. If you feel as though you're beyond that and that you just want to grow more into what you really are, then you'll also gain a lot of value from this video, because I'm going to talk today about how you can become more and more one with the infinite energy of the universe. Some will call it the divine, some people might call it source or the absolute. But how do we become one with that? Because everyone says, oh well, everything is one. But how do we actually make that more and more of something that is a lived reality? Now, I would argue that we're all working towards that, whether we know it or not. But it's really I suppose this video is about how we can get closer and closer and closer to that experientially. Some would say that the total experience of that is perhaps enlightenment or moksha, but we can start to allow this energy to guide us and help us. And I think personally that there is one phrase, one word that means a certain action, or inaction in some cases, that really speeds up this process of becoming one with the infinite, being guided by the infinite. And that is surrender. And many people, it's one of the questions that I get a lot, is how do you surrender? How do you surrender to this energy? How do you surrender to the divine, to the universe, and allow that to guide you? Because we're clueless, really. We think we know everything. We think we're really clever, but we're actually drawing that information from somewhere. It's either learned and someone else is drawing it from somewhere, or we're drawing it from somewhere. So nothing is actually ever ours. You know, we've got this body, it's temporary. The body isn't ours, but we think it is. We call it ours. We say my body, but it's not really my body. It's on rent. We're loaning this body. This body's on loan to us. Same as the universe, same as the information, same as absolutely everything. And when you bring it back down to the essence and you start to look at, well, what is actually mine? We start to realize more and more the truth of reality, which I'll explain a little bit in this video. So we're always pulling information from someone, somewhere. If it's coming from someone, they've pulled it from somewhere. If they've found it from someone else and that person's found it from someone else, there's a core essence where that's come from. And I would call it the superconscious. The superconscious is the knowledge that we're all tapping into. Someone from the start has tapped into that knowledge, and then that's being passed around between us all through videos and through books and through talks and things like that. What I'm teaching you now, some of it I may have learned, some of it I may have been taught about, some of it I may have read, but ultimately all of the teachings, whether it's from a human being or whether it's from intuition, has come from the same place to begin with, which is the superconscious, which is the knowledge that was passed down or is available to us that is part of the infinite. You could say that this physical realm has come with a package of knowledge, a very large, vast packet of knowledge that we're only just tapping into. And everyone that learns something, figures something out, creates something, is inspired in some way and learns something comes through them, all of that's coming from this one place, this superconscious mind. So we can tap into that through the law of attraction. I know that sounds new agey, but the law of attraction basically means what you want, you start to harmonize with that vibrationally and you attain it. So scientists that are looking for breakthroughs in certain fields of science will, through their own efforts, vibrationally match the information that they're actually seeking, and that information is always there. It's not new information. They've not invented it. They've found it. They've found it through their internal vibration, really. They've matched up vibrationally with that information. We're always doing that. Spiritually, we're doing it in many different ways, and you, hilariously, and me in many other ways as well, but in this instance, you've vibrationally matched with the information that you're learning in this, whether you want it, whether you agree with it, whether whatever. There's something that's harmonized for you to have come across this video right now, which is quite interesting, I always think. So where was I going with that? We're looking to make our life easier. We're looking to make life more harmonious, probably a better way of putting it. We're looking to make life work for us. And in order to do that, we have to come into harmony with the Creator, with the infinite. Nature is in harmony. It goes through cycles. It might be out of harmony because we've messed it up, but in a normal situation, in a normal circumstance, it functions in a specific way within a rough time frame. Everything works in a process, in a cycle, because it's all in harmony. We're not in harmony with the divine in many ways, and because of that we suffer. And the reason we're not in harmony with the divine is because we've grown separate from the divine in our thinking, in as much as we think we're separate from the infinite. We consider ourselves a separate being, a separate person, and to a small extent it's true in the fact that we have a body and we have a name and we have interests and things. But all of those things, if you were to come right the way back, come from one source. So they're all part of one source anyway. So although it may feel like we're separate from everything, and we've got a separate body and a separate name, separate interests, and everything feels separate to us, it's actually not. And then many of us know this on a level, some level. We all know that we are part of something bigger. But the part of us that makes us feel as though we are separate from everything is the very thing that we need to surrender. So coming back to the surrender point that I mentioned at the start, this is really the key to starting to flow more with the natural rhythm of the universe, or allow the divine to guide you, if you want to look at it that way. Be guided by something higher, which is you anyway. And the hilarious thing is that my teacher said this to me once. He said, all I'm asking you to do is give yourself back to yourself. All I'm asking you to do is give yourself back to yourself. Because we feel as though we're giving something up when we surrender. We feel as though we're losing something if we surrender. And I'll talk about how to surrender in a moment if you're wondering. But it can often feel as though we have to give things up, we have to sacrifice something, we have to lose something. But it's not the case. In fact, we have to subjugate something, might be a better way of putting it. Something lower that thinks it's bigger has to be put back in its position again, i.e. the ego that thinks it is something substantial has to be reminded of the truth that it isn't actually who we are. This mind and body that we think we are has to be understood that it is just a tool, it's just a vehicle, or they just are vehicles, they are tools. And what we really are is the infinite divine reality, the one infinite energy that everything is composed of is also what we are composed of. Nature is part of the divine. Nature is in harmony generally when we're not messing it up. We are composed of nature, and therefore we're part of it all. We are. And this isn't a theory that I've just come up with or some fancy string of words that I'm just clubbing together. I've experienced states of mind and states of reality beyond this physical plane. And I have, although I'm not claiming to have by any means had the final realization or the final vision, I know for a fact that we're not physical beings. I know that for a complete and absolute fact. So we have to start to surrender what we think we are in order to allow what we really are to come through more. And I say more because oftentimes it can feel like an impossible thing to become one with the divine. And many would argue that might take lifetimes. But what we can do is we can step up the ladder of consciousness. We can step up the ladder of realization. And as you step up that ladder, you get a broader and broader perspective, and things make more and more sense in your experience of it. Not in just random knowledge, but you just know more. Things make sense more. It's hard to describe, but you have to start to surrender the very part of you that doesn't want to surrender. And the way that for me, I surrender, and this is, again, it's not a theory, this is something that I experientially feel, and many others do as well, is through things like prayer. And before you click off and think, oh, I'm not into all that religious stuff, or that, that was back, I did that back in the day when I was a Christian or something, and you don't like prayer anymore. Prayer is really just an inner communion with that one energy that you already are. But the beautiful thing with prayer is that because you take a position of I'm here and the divine is all around me, it's not somewhere that's far away from me, but the divine is separate. There's always that sense of separation, or at least it appears so when you pray or when you speak to the divine, when you speak to the universe. The beautiful thing about that is that you have to subdue yourself. The part of you that thinks it's something, the ego, part of all of us that thinks it's something, you have to subdue that and put it to one side in order to seemingly talk to yourself. And this comes back to what my teacher said. All I'm asking you to do is give yourself back to yourself. There is no one really that surrenders, and this is something that Sai Baba said. He said something along the lines of, there is no one that surrenders, there's no one to surrender to, and there's no one to accept the surrender. Meaning that it's all what they call in Hinduism a lila, which is like a play, a divine play, which we're part of. But the paradox of that is that there is something that surrenders in a sense, which is the part of you that senses that it is something has to surrender. It is nothing, because everything is the divine, coming back to that. So you're always tripping yourself up with these kind of conversations, especially if you're doing a video like this where you're always having to like smooth over the edges of all the different points you're making, or I'm making. But there is a part of us that thinks it's something that we have to surrender. And when you pray, you communicate with that infinite energy, the divine, and you humble yourself, and you come in contact with that one energy. And in the same way that I was talking about earlier, a scientist draws energy from the superconscious by vibrationally matching with that information that it wants or it needs. It brings itself to the level of what it is that it's actually after, what they're after. We do that when we communicate with the divine, when we aspire to know more, when we aspire to grow, when we realise that life is quite challenging when we're trying to do everything ourselves, when we're working for ourselves, we build up tension, we'll reach a point where we need some assistance, so to speak. And it's at that point that we start to say, okay, divine, energy, universe, I need to be guided, I need to be helped. And in that moment, we surrender a part of ourselves. So every time that you pray sincerely and purely and from just a pure, sincere part of yourself, quite simply, you're almost giving part of the other part of yourself over. The part that doesn't, none of these parts exist, but the sense of that part, i.e. the ego, you're giving over. You give it over every time. And it's almost like you've got two cups. You've got one cup that thinks it's the body and the mind, and that's the ego, and you've got the other part of you that's actually the true part, which you're always one with, which is the divine. And you're always tipping the cup of the ego into the cup of the divine, diminishing this sense of self and expanding what you really are. Now, as I say, they're both the divine. From the highest perspective, they're both the divine, but this process has to be gone through because we're not realising that yet. We're not experiencing that yet. But this, it's hard for me to do this without, as I said earlier, like nuancing everything and smoothing over all the edges. And in doing that, it can make these types of talks confusing sometimes to some people. But coming back to the core of what this talk was about, it's about surrendering the ego and surrendering to the infinite energy by praying, by talking to it, by asking for help, by realising that this personality and this life that we've created might go well for some time, but at some point or another you might feel alone. You might feel like life is, life is hard and things aren't really making sense. And at that point, at some point or another, everyone will start to turn. And whether that is through prayer or these other means, or whether it's through something else, I think everyone does start to look for some sort of invisible help. And that help does come, but you have to surrender to begin with. And prayer is a beautiful way of doing it. But ultimately, for me, it's the first step is by putting the divine ahead of you. And that seems paradoxical, because as I keep doing with this talk, I'm smoothing over all the edges, trying to make sense of it from the two perspectives, the relative and the absolute. And it's almost impossible not to be jumping between the two, making sure you're aware that I'm aware that I'm talking from one side or the other, if that makes sense. But I tend to put the divine on a pedestal and talk to the divine very lovingly and with a lot of awe and devotion, for the very reason that it reduces your sense of self when you do that. But the only part that you're loving and you're devoting yourself to is actually yourself. So this is the beautiful thing, is that many people think it's childlike, or it's amateurish, or it's low level to be devotional, to love the divine, to pray. People think these things are silly, childish or religious, but they're not. They're actually very beautiful when you understand that you're actually praying to, loving, devoting yourself to yourself, because that is what you are anyway. And in doing that, with that cup analogy, you're pouring what you think you are into what you actually are. As my teacher said, as I've mentioned a few times now, you're giving yourself back to yourself. You're giving who you think you are back to who you really are. And at some point, that merging will take place, where you finally experience and know completely what you've always been. And the maya, as they say, the illusion of this reality is understood and known. So it's all about surrender, this video. It's all about how to surrender, and that is through, in my opinion, devotion, love, offering things to the divine, offering the day, offering your problems, offering your good experiences, communicating inwardly, prayer, I can't remember if I said prayer, but prayer, all of those types of things, creating this, putting the divine on a pedestal in your mind and talking very lovingly and respectfully, as you would to, I don't know, if you were like a 5-6-year-old and you absolutely idolised your dad, or your mum, how you would with that, do that with the divine. And it humbles you, it makes you feel, it just feels right. But carry the understanding, this is the difference between many religions, many religious teachings, is that still carry the understanding that you are the divine. You are really that which you're devoting yourself to and praying to. But at this level, at this point, it's perfectly good and perfectly fine to carry that devotion in that kind of way. So I'm going to leave it at that. It's absolutely gorgeous evening here. But I feel as though I'm going to confuse things if I carry on, because there's so many edges that I'm smoothing over. I'm trying to keep everything in line so it makes sense. But I hope this helps you, and as always, hope to see you on the next video. Thanks a lot.